Good evening, everybody. My name is Todd Scholl. I serve as the lead learner for the SCEA Center for Educator Wellness and Learning. We call ourselves Cool. And you can find all of our content on the website, cool.us. That's CEWL.us, including a lot of member led content and a form for you to request free professional learning for your school or district. If you are a public school or you're in a public school district in South Carolina, the SCEA can provide you free, relevant, and engaging professional learning. We can do it virtually, we can do it in person, whatever your needs are. All you have to do is go to the website that you see right there, cool.us, fill out the form, and we'll be in touch with you within a few days. Welcome to tonight's program. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about mindfulness, what it is, some of the science behind it, why it might be a good thing for you to consider practicing. Then we're going to do a practice and then wrap things up. Before we get started, I have an exciting announcement to share with you. We just launched registration for our 2024 South Carolina Educator Mindfulness Retreat. That will be held June 12th through the 14th. That's next June, 12th through the 14th in Black Mountain, North Carolina. We will be back at Quietude Retreat Center, which is just outside of town, not hard to get to, not way out in the middle of the wilderness, very easy, very accessible. And it is going to be a secular, science-based, trauma-sensitive retreat. It's designed by educators, and it is for specifically educators. And you can find out more information about that, including the registration, the application to register, at cool.us/retreat, right here at the bottom of your screen, cool.us/retreat. All of our resources all can be found on that Cool website, including information about the retreat. You can see pictures of Quietude, what the cabins look like, what that will include. It'll be a 3-day, 2-night retreat that will include 2 nights accommodations in a cabin, and it will also include your meals, yoga, all the training, and a book. So it's so much that you're getting for a very low price. It's priced lower for our members. So if you're even thinking about joining the SCEA, if you're planning on going to the retreat, it makes no sense not to join the SCEA. So you get a significant discount on your retreat fees. But check out the website, check out the pricing. It's really, really very, very affordable for educators. And that was one of the most important things that we considered when we created these mindfulness retreats. We really wanted to create something that was secular so that people of all religious or faith backgrounds can feel comfortable attending, and something that was accessible and secular and but also affordable. And that was really, really important, and something that wasn't so far away, because a lot of these retreats you hear about are in San Francisco or New York. This is in Black Mountain, North Carolina, which is not too far from Asheville. If you're familiar with that, just head on up 26, head east on 40 a little bit. It's not hard to get to at all. So without further ado, let's talk about mindfulness. And before we do, one of the things that I failed to do, I've been teaching mindfulness now to educators for over 10 years. I started this session back in 2011, and for a long time, I did not acknowledge where it came from. And I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that mindfulness is not something I came up with. It's not something that was really developed here in the West. It was brought to the West, but it was developed over 2,000 years ago, like 2,000, 2,500 years ago, in India as part of the Hindu faith, and also developed in Buddhist countries and throughout the Buddhist faith. And I say that, and I realize that some of you may think, well, I'm Christian, or I'm atheist, or I'm Jewish, or whatever, and I don't want to practice anything that conflicts with my faith. Which is why here in the West we have, in many places, including this one, we're stripping away the sort of metaphysical parts of the practice, and really just investigating how the mind works. So mindfulness really is not, we're not going to do anything tonight where you see special colors no one else sees. I'm not going to levitate out of my chair or anything like that. Nothing metaphysical is happening. There are no faith-based claims being made here tonight. What mindfulness is, the best definition I've heard is it's paying attention to the present moment without judgment. So, um, so think about what's going on in your mind throughout the day. For me, I do a lot of time traveling. I really think about things that happened and I mull over them, and I sometimes that brings up feelings of guilt or regret, or sometimes I'm thinking about something pleasant that happened, but a lot of time I'm thinking about stuff that happened in the past. I also think a lot about stuff coming up in the future, like, when do I have to pick up my daughter from school? What are we gonna have for dinner? Do I need to stop by the grocery store? What have I got going on tonight? Do I have a live stream? Am I prepared for that? Things like that. So, I time travel. So, mindfulness, one part of it is the capacity for your full attention and your awareness to be on the present moment, what you're doing right now, where you are, where are your feet? Your head is where your feet are, right? So that's part of it. But then the other part of it is letting go of sort of labeling and judging your experience. So sometimes we can be where our feet are mentally and physically in the same place, but we're judging it, we're labeling it, we're catastrophizing, or we're saying, this is awful. So I'll give you an example, a real life example of this that happened to me a couple of weeks ago. I was traveling from Greenville to Asheville for a weekend trip, and it was about an hour and a half to get to where I was going. And I got there and realized when I got there on Friday night that I had forgotten all of my medication. So at that point, I had to drive all the way back to Greenville because there was no way I couldn't go without the medication that I need. And I knew I couldn't go to CVS at 8 or 9 o'clock at night and get replacement for all my medication. And there's nobody I could borrow it from. So the thing was I had to go back. So I was in resistance to that. I was judging that and labeling that experience like, "Oh my god, how can I be so stupid? This is such a pain in the butt. I've got to drive all the way back. I just got here. I'm tired. It's the end of the week and I just wanted to relax in the mountains, and now I've got to drive all the way back to Greenville, and then I got to drive all the way back to Asheville, and like what should have been an hour and a half trip and I'm done and I can relax is now going to be 4.5 hours of driving." And I noticed so much resistance coming up with that. And my friend said, um, second arrow. And I immediately knew what she meant. She meant the first arrow was something that was just a mistake. Like I forgot the medication. And that's painful and it sucks. And it's already there. It's plunged in. I've got that first arrow. The question is, am I going to take that arrow out and then move on? Or am I going to plunge a second arrow into me, which is another sort of concept that came from the Eastern parables. So that second arrow is me being in resistance to the fact that I've got to go back to Greenville and being tense and upset and frustrated and holding on to like just this self judgment of how dumb I was to forget it. And oh my gosh, I'm wasting time and I could be relaxing. And instead, I got to drive back and like wasting gas and all that. Right. So mindfulness is the capacity to come back to the present moment and then drop all of that. Not be in denial of what's happening in the present moment, but not in constant resistance and constant judgment, personalizing and catastrophizing what's happening in our present moment. So there's a real benefit when we can be mindful, because when we're mindful, when we notice that when we're paying attention to the present moment, we can let go of the judgment and labeling of it, that is more likely to be correlated or strongly connected to feelings of being at peace, relaxed, like equanimous, meaning like we're okay with how things are, regardless of how they are. Um, so if we can be mindful, we have more of those pleasant sort of things going on. It doesn't guarantee that, but it makes it more likely. We're creating the space where peace can emerge, where relaxation can potentially emerge. It doesn't necessarily mean that it will, but we're creating those conditions. But mindfulness, to be mindful, requires practice, just like playing a violin does. You can't just pick up the violin and play it well. If you want to learn a foreign language like Spanish or German, you've got to practice. You can't just start speaking it. Mindfulness is also a skill that has to be practiced and cultivated, because society really, we're training ourselves not to be mindful all the time because we're constantly on our phone. We're constantly thinking about what's next. We're constantly looking at our to-do list, our planner. We're texting people. We're on social media, and we're constantly moving our attention around past, future, and then we're judging things. We're looking at scrolling through our face. Oh my gosh, I can't believe he posted that. Like, we're constantly judging and labeling the experience. And educators in particular are taught to constantly be evaluating student performance and their own performance, constantly thinking about being reflective on their practice and planning for the next class and the next day, the next week, the whole year. We're looking forward, right? So we are often in the midst of not being mindful at all as educators. So it really takes this sort of a counter programming to overcome that, because it's really easy to get wrapped up in our thoughts, and then we have a tendency sometimes, at least I do, to overthink, to overanalyze, to get into this rumination that we do where, like, you come to school and maybe you had an argument with your spouse and you're replaying that argument and you can't really let it go. Or you had a rough day at school, you had a really difficult class, or the principal said something that you didn't like, or a parent said something, and now you're coming home to spend time with your parents. And rather, I mean, with your family, and rather than being at home with your family, your brain is back replaying the things that happened in your school day. And you're not really able to let that go and let it sort of unwind so that you can be fully present for your spouse or your significant other or your kids or your parents or your friends or even for yourself. So there's a real practical application to learning mindfulness. And that is that it helps us when we develop the capacity to pay attention to the present moment. Our relationships benefit because we're more in tuned and more paying attention to the person in front of us. We're not constantly distracted. And then we also can kind of let go of the things that happened in our past, let go of the worries about the future, and be present and enjoy what's in front of us. So, um, why did I learn this? How did I learn this? Um, I was teaching. This was back in 2001, 2002. So I became a father for the first time. My daughter Madison was born in 2000, February of 2001. And at that time, I was coaching girls and boys tennis. So I was in the fall coaching boys tennis, I mean girls tennis, and in the spring coaching girls tennis. And then in the wintertime, a lot of times I was helping out with maybe B squad basketball. I was announcing all the home football games. I was announcing all the home varsity basketball games. I often worked during the summer and worked part-time jobs along the way. And then I added fatherhood into all that mix, right? So I became a father for the first time, and by the end of that school year, by that summer, I was so overwhelmed because I had added on top of all the stuff that I was doing in the classroom. I was now helping to change diapers and feed the baby at Madison at night, and sterilize her bottles and change the diapers, and drive her to her grandmother's house and pick her up, and all that stuff was being added on top, and it was just getting to me overwhelming. Like, I just had so much to do, and this doesn't even include like laundry and housework and yard work and things like that. So I became really overwhelmed by it all. Like, I just felt like I didn't have a moment in the day to relax or just to unwind. And then the weekends were spent kind of catching up or doing stuff like going to practices or going to other school events or trying to take my daughter somewhere to entertain her. Uh, and it got overwhelming. And when you are chronically overwhelmed, when you don't put any space in your life for self-care, when you don't give any space in your life for taking walks, meditating, relaxing, resting, napping, things like that, over time, what happens is that chronic feeling of being overwhelmed will deplete your serotonin, and it can potentially create a lot of anxiety. So I developed an anxiety disorder, and then became depressed, and I went to a doctor, and I went to a therapist and was prescribed medicine, and then went to therapy and worked on all of that. And it was a challenge. It was a major challenge. And one of the things my therapist said was, maybe you should try mindfulness meditation. And I was like, what are you talking about? Mindfulness meditation? What mindfulness? Like, I was thinking meditation as like, that's just something like people from the East do, or like, like Buddhists do, or, maybe New Age people. But I'm not, it's not for me. Like, I don't believe in all that stuff. I lumped it in with stuff like tarot cards and crystals and thing. If you believe that stuff, that's fine. For me, it just felt very woo woo. And I was like, what are you talking about? Meditation. But he said, listen, there's really actually a lot of research that shows this is very beneficial for people who are struggling with anxiety. So I went home and I have an open mind, and I liked my therapist, and he said, so I tried what he said, and I went into a room, I closed the door, turned off the lights, sat on the bed, and closed my eyes and started to breathe, and slowed down my breathing. And I thought at the time that the idea was I'm supposed to try to stop my thoughts, stop these anxious thoughts, like just cut off the anxious thoughts. And I sat there, and within a minute or two, I was more anxious than when I started. So I got up, turned on the lights, and I said, "Oh, forget this. This isn't going to work for me. This just doesn't work for me. It's not. Maybe it works for some people, but it's not. It doesn't work for me. So I'm done." And I kept going back to that therapist, and he kept talking to me about it, and he started to explain it in terms that really helped. That kind of clicked with me because I'm kind of a technology kind of person. He said, Todd, what we've got going on here is you've got an operating system. And you develop this operating system. Part of it is just the way your wetware is configured from birth. You have parents who gave you DNA, and you have a certain type of brain. And then you also developed certain tendencies and habits as you grew up based upon that neural architecture. And one of those tendencies is you tend to like overthink things. You tend to really analyze things and think things, and you have a hard time letting go of those thoughts, and you're generating a lot of your own suffering. You're generating a lot of your own misery and stress. And what the mindfulness practice is going to do for you, it's not going to do it immediately, but what it's going to do for you is it's going to help delete some of those files. We don't want to, a whole new operating system. We want to just delete some of those files and give you like an OS upgrade. We want to like give you a new installation of some files and delete some old files. That made sense to me. So then I went back to it and tried again. And he also said to me, don't try to stop your thoughts because you're not going to. So I went back into the practice, and he said, all you have to do is just try to focus on your breath. And when you notice that you're thinking, just notice that. This doesn't mean you're bad. Don't try to push the thought away. Just notice it and then come back to the sensation of your breath, and just keep doing that over and over again and trust the process. So I did it. And it's kind of like some folks have compared it to like learning how to walk across a tightrope. At first, you can only take a step or two and you fall off because you get out of balance. But after time, if you continue to practice, you learn to gain balance and you can walk across the tightrope. So for me, this practice kind of was like that. In time, I learned to sort of balance myself in the practice. I learned that I don't have to push the thought away. I can just notice the thought as it emerges in my awareness. Just notice it, and notice that, oh, I'm not paying attention to my breath. And that's the whole, I'm trying to give some effort into paying attention to my breath here. And I'm not anymore. I'm thinking about that thing, or I'm worrying about that thing. And no judgment, just going, and gently redirecting the attention back to my breath. And for me, my personal experience was that I noticed my sense of calm, like I noticed a sense of calm come over me the longer I practiced, a sense of ease. Now, that doesn't happen every time, and it may not happen for you, certainly not every time. But for me, I noticed a sense of calm. And what it helped me to do over time as I practiced it is to recognize when thoughts would come up that normally they would sort of stick to me, and I would stare at them and I would ruminate about them for a long, long time. I just noticed them and then was able to sort of zoom out, and they're still there, but I was able to redirect my attention back to what I was doing in the present moment. So I took what I was learning through the practice, and then in my day to day, when thoughts would come up that normally would throw me off into like this sort of spiraling, ruminating, in my head, stressed out kind of state, I learned to sort of short circuit that process. And as the thought emerged, kind of not stop it, but sort of notice it as it bubbled up, and just allow it to be. And somebody used a really great metaphor in a book I read. I don't know if you've ever had those finger traps that you can get at like Chuck E. Cheese or whatever. And the harder you pull on those finger traps, the more you're trapped. And so anxiety and anxious thoughts are kind of like that. Like the more you try to get rid of them, the more you're trapped by them. So you just kind of like ease your way out of those thoughts by allowing them to just be. They can be there. You can even feel the anxiety or feel that unpleasant state and allow yourself to feel it, and then just redirect your attention back to the breath. So that process, by practicing that for several years, really, really helped me, and it kind of lifted me out of that anxiety. It didn't completely eliminate or cure my anxiety, but it made it a lot more manageable. I was much better able to like go into and face what I needed to do at school and then as a parent. And I also learned to have the clarity to start setting boundaries and let go of some of the things that I was investing my time in that weren't essential. So I started to let go of some of the things that I was juggling so that I could manage the important things that I needed to juggle better. So that was my story. The quick and simple science, and there's a lot of science behind this, is that when you practice, when you we'll talk about it like a mindfulness of breathing practice. You're what you're doing is you're focusing on the sensation of breath. And as you focus on that, what we notice is the sort of self narration parts of the brain, the parts that are responsible for selfing, for telling you the story of who you are and what's going on in your life, the parts that time travel and construct memories and construct fictional futures or imagined futures, all those parts of the brain kind of start to come offline. And what happens is the boundaries of that you create around yourself that include your place in time and space and your relationships and all of that. There's a tendency for those parts of the brain that construct the self to start to come offline a little bit and loosen up, kind of like peeling back on an onion. And as those things come offline, there's something called the default mode network that also gets dampened. So the default mode network can be seen on MRI scans. It's that part of the brain that's correlated to ruminating and thinking without a specific purpose. So there's a couple of different ways you can, when you're mired in this ruminating, anxious kind of thinking, there's a couple different ways you can kind of address that. One of the ways is to activate the task positive network. And this is what I see a lot of people doing to address their stressful thinking. They just make themselves busy all day long. So they're constantly doing, constantly filling their day with stuff to do as a distraction from the anxiety or the difficult thoughts. And that is an approach you can take, but I'm not sure that that's a healthy, sustainable way to do it. So mindfulness meditation is another way to dampen that default mode network and to sort of help us ease out of that sort of constant storytelling part of our brain that's constantly telling us what's going on in our lives and what's important for us to focus on. Now, we do that. We think about our past and future so much because that is a really great adaptation for survival. So, survival requires me to remember the mistakes that I made so that I don't make them again. To remember things that were dangerous or difficult or hard so that I can try to have them not replicate in the future. So being focusing on difficult memories is a great evolutionary adaptation that helped us survive. It also helps us to survive if we can imagine what's happening in our future and we can avoid dangerous choices or dangerous things that happen in our future. So if we're thinking okay, we're problem solving, we're thinking about the future and all the things that can go wrong. It helps us focus on those things so that we can avoid those things. That's all great for survival. And what Dr. Rick Hansen, a famous psychologist, would say is that that's sort of this negativity bias that's sort of built in. So going back to what my therapist said, we have this operating system, we have this program running in our brains, and part of the program is to pay attention to what's wrong in our environment, to be vigilant about threats, to be vigilant about past threats, future threats, current threats, to constantly be paying attention to what's wrong in the environment so that we can be safe and continue to survive. The problem is that we put that on like an autopilot and we amplify it and we continue to think and think and think about things that went wrong and could go wrong. And so much so that we're almost like the imagination is so good that the nervous system can't distinguish it between like imagined or real like suffering and horrible things that can happen. And we get really anxious and activate that HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. And we feel the adrenaline and we feel that cortisol rushing through our bodies and we get really tense and maybe your blood pressure goes up and you or you just feel tense and your heart rate goes up and you're breathing faster and more shallow, right? That stress response is activated, I think, a lot for teachers throughout the day. And if we go home and we're still reliving that stressful day at work, then we're continuing to reactivate that stress response even when we're at home. So, what does this have to do with mindfulness? Well, mindfulness helps us to sort of redirect the attention away from that thought world to what's in front of us. And most of the time, what's in front of us is not problematic. We don't normally have bears or life threatening situations in front of us. If we do, obviously, we want to react. We want the amygdala to fire off, and we want to have a stress response because we need to be able to fight, flee, or or free, whatever we need to do to survive, right? But most of the time, if you think about it during your day, you're fine. Most of your mental anguish, at least for me, most of the mental anguish I experience is how I think about what's happened or what could happen. And if I can let go of some of that, then I can sort of reclaim some of this mental territory and make that space for more peace, more just kind of equanimity, just like I'm okay. So, the last little bit I want to talk about before we do the practice. You heard me say Buddhism, you heard me say Hinduism. It's really important that we understand that this is where some of these practices come from. Um, but it's also important that we understand that practicing mindfulness does not make you a Buddhist or Hindu or any other religion. It doesn't modify or change whatever you currently are. And somebody once said, if you eat spaghetti, you don't become Italian, right? So when we practice this practice, what we're going to be doing, it's really just sort of a psychological practice. It's an investigation of your mind. We're going to pretend like you would if you look through a telescope or a microscope and you were looking through that and you just were observing a slide under a microscope or you had it focused on Saturn and you're observing through a telescope. We're just going to be observing the mind during this practice and how our minds work. And when we build this awareness around how our minds work, it helps us to see where the stressful thoughts come from, how they emerge. And then it also helps us build new neural architecture that allows us to be more mindful and less ruminating, less wrapped up in past, future thought and stressful negativity and difficult emotions, difficult like thoughts that create unnecessary suffering. So here's the practice, and I invite you to practice. And by the way, I'm very much for mindfulness being implemented in schools. But it's really important that we understand that mindfulness should always be invitational. It should never be something where we say, all right, everybody's going to practice at this time for for this amount of time, and everybody's got to do it. Like it should never be mandatory. It should never be something like everybody's doing it now. Like it should be invitational for it to be trauma sensitive, especially because sometimes practicing mindfulness can bring up difficult emotions. If you're currently trying to heal from trauma and you close your eyes and you're quiet, it can potentially exacerbate trauma. We don't want to do that to our students or to our colleagues. So we always want to use invitational language when we use mindfulness and always respect people's right to say to opt out of any practices. So tonight I'm inviting you to practice with me. And if at any point it doesn't feel right for you, feel free to log off or pause or whatever you need to do. But I want you to know that you shouldn't press and press and press if it just doesn't feel right for you. Okay. So how does the practice work? Um, the practice that I'm going to be showing, mindfulness of breath, and you're welcome, Karen. I'm more than happy. And Keneal, thank you for tuning in. Um, the practice goes like this. I invite you to sit up in a chair, put your feet flat on the floor. So I'm going to get my feet flat on the floor, put your hands comfortably in your lap, and you want to sit up straight, not rigid like a citadel cadet, not like that, but just sitting up straight because you may start to feel relaxed. And if you do, we don't want to fall. The idea here is not trying to fall asleep. Okay. If you fall asleep, that's perfectly fine though. All right. So sit up straight. And if it's comfortable for you, I invite you to close your eyes. So I'm going to close my eyes. If that doesn't feel good to you, then feel free to just stare at a spot in front of you. Just find a spot to gaze at in front of you. And what I want you to do is just take a few deep breaths, just nice inhales. Really fill those lungs. And as you exhale, let it be an audible exhale. And what I want you to do is to set an intention right now for the next few minutes that you don't need to do anything else, that you're not a human doing, that you're going to be a human being. You're just going to be and do this practice. You're just going to be doing this practice. Um, and your to do list can be set aside, and your household chores and your worries and your concerns and your regrets and your emails and your text messages and the social media, all that can be sort of set aside for just a few minutes for you to invest in your own wellness and to explore this practice and see how it works for you. So I want you to continue breathing and find the sensation of your breath wherever it is most noticeable. So for me, my breath is most noticeable right here at the tip of my nose. That's where I feel it the most. I feel it on the inhale and the exhale. But for you, it could be in your throat, like the back of your throat, or it may be in your chest as it expands and contracts, or it may be down in your belly as your belly moves. So wherever you feel your breath the most, that's where I want you to shift your awareness. I want you to shift your awareness to the sensation of your breath wherever you feel it the most. Now, why are we using our breath? What does this have to do with anything? When does the breath occur? Well, the breath is always occurring now. And if I'm trying to practice mindfulness, which is paying attention to now, then if I can force my brain or kind of encourage my brain to be aware of the breath, then I'm training my brain to pay attention to something happening now, a sensation that's happening now. Because in the inhale and the exhale, that's always happening now. So find your breath and see how long you can pay attention to it. And what you'll notice is as you continue to try to pay attention to your breath, is that the brain, which is used to thinking and problem solving all day long, is going to probably bubble up some kind of thought. It could be a thought about something that happened during your school day, something that happened at home, maybe something you have going on tomorrow, maybe some problem you're experiencing in your relationship or with health or whatever. Some kind of thought may come up and stick and pull you away from the sensation of your breath. That's fine. Totally fine. That's normal. That doesn't mean you're bad at this. It doesn't mean that you can't do it. That's what happens to most people when they practice is thoughts come up, and it may be a lot of thoughts that come up. The key here in this practice is that as soon as you notice that you are not paying attention to your breath, that instead you're paying attention to that thought, that you're lost in a thought, you first of all smile and say, huh. And that means like you just developed an awareness that you weren't paying attention to the present moment, that you were paying attention to a thought instead. And then smile and without judgment, without being in a rush, just redirect your attention back to the sensation of your breath wherever you felt it the most. So I'm going to be quiet for just a minute and I want you to try to pay attention to your breath. And when you notice that you're not paying attention to it anymore, just celebrate that a little bit and then gently return to the sensation of your breath. If it helps you, you can count your breath or you can label the breath. You can say, I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out, I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out. If that helps you to stay connected to your breath, feel free to do that or count them off. And I'm going to be quiet for just a few minutes while you do that. Mhm. Where's your attention now? Is it on your breath or a thought? If it's on a thought, no problem. Don't push it away. Don't try to stop your thoughts. You can't. Just redirect your attention to your breath. Just keep coming back to your breath. Just notice that thoughts come up, no matter what the thought is. It can be stressful or just weird or normal, whatever thought comes up. We're not trying to put it back in the bottle, not trying to stop it. Just notice it the way you would notice a cloud going by in the sky or a bird or a fish swimming through a pond. Just notice it. It's no problem. Just notice the thought, and then bring your attention back to your breath. Find your breath again. Stay with it. The inhale, the exhale. Stay with that breath. Not trying to stop thoughts. Just trying to stay focused on the breath. Now, let's take a few deep breaths together. And what I would like you to do is just fill your lungs to capacity and then hold that breath for a count of 4. And then slowly release the breath. And I want you to be audible with your exhale. So we're really exhaling. And as you breathe in, I want you to imagine that you're breathing in lightness and relaxation, peace, sense of equanimity, stillness. And as you exhale, I want you to imagine that you're letting go of things from your past that may bring up guilt or shame or regret or anger or frustration. Things from your future that you may be worried about or over analyzing. Judgments about yourself and others. Just letting those go so that we can feel a sense of lightness and letting go of those burdens and the heaviness that we're carrying around these difficult thoughts, these challenging thoughts. And if they feel difficult to let go, that's okay. Just notice that and continue to breathe nice and slowly with a hold of 4 and then a slow release. And what we're doing as we slow our breath, we're activating the parasympathetic part of the autonomic nervous system, signaling to the brain that we're safe and that it's okay. A few more deep breaths. Let the tension in your face and your shoulders and your neck just kind of melt and drop. Notice any tension in your hands or your feet, your back, and just try to let go of that tension. Just loosen everything up. And when it's comfortable, I invite you to open your eyes back up. So, how did that feel? And what did you notice? And there is no right or wrong answer to that question. Whatever you feel right now is fine. That you may feel relaxed. You may feel really good. You may feel tense or more stressed out or anxious or sad or angry. Perfectly fine. We're not striving for a particular state of mind. There does seem to be a side effect of regular practice and feeling calmer and feeling less stressed, but not always. That's not how the practice is always going to show up and feel inside you, and that's okay. That doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. And if you struggle to pay attention to your breath and you constantly were thinking, please know that doesn't mean you're bad at this. That doesn't mean that this is a failure or that you just can't do it. And I've heard so many people say that, like, I've tried it and I just can't do it. I just can't stop my thinking. And that's right. You can't. You can't stop your thinking. The only thing you can do is commit to sitting down and doing the practice and noticing when you're thinking and coming back to your breath. And that's just like a repetition, like a bench press, right? Every time you come back to your breath, that's like, think of that as a repetition. And again, just like learning the violin or Spanish, this isn't a practice like mindfulness isn't something you're going to master in one session or in 10 sessions or in 100 sessions. It takes time to cultivate this practice. And then the idea is to be able to not just do this practice and think of it in isolation, but to take what we're learning and to take the new neural architecture that we're developing in practice and bring that into our conversations, our relationships with students, with parents, with colleagues, with our families, with our friends, to bring this capacity to come to the present moment, to be fully absorbed in the here and now, and to let go of these judgments so that you don't have that second arrow. So then when something goes wrong at school or wrong in a conversation or you have an argument or you forget your medication or whatever happens and you get to the store and you forgot your wallet or your credit card or whatever, and now you got to go back home and you're already tired and stressed. That yes, you've got that one first arrow, but we don't have to add the second arrow of agonizing over and adding the layers of thinking and self-judgment and personalizing and catastrophizing on top of it. We can just take a few breaths and come back to the present moment. And one of the things I know that teachers struggle with is finding time to do the practice. So there's a couple things. One is you can do very short micro practices multiple times throughout the day. So 3 or 4 mindful breaths, in between each class, but right before you go to duty, right as the bell rings at the end of the day, maybe 3 or 4 mindful breaths. Try to insert little micro practices multiple times throughout your day. That can help. Also, on the SCEA's website, I've recorded on the member content area. It's going to be posted sometime within the next week. There are 5, 10, 15, and 20-minute guided mindfulness practices that you'll be able to stream or download. So if you don't already have an account, go to the scea.org and go to the member access if you're already a member and sign up for an account so that you can start to access our member only content. Before we leave, I do want to share a couple of things with you. I want to remind you again, if you are interested in learning more about this, going in deeper into practice, deeper into understanding what mindfulness is, and enjoy just a time away to disconnect from everything, to reconnect with yourself, I encourage you to look into this. This is our Educator Mindfulness Retreat. The NEA has done such a remarkable job of providing us with funding to make this an incredibly affordable event for our members. But even for non members, it's still pretty affordable. It's about $100 more for non members. It is a secular and science based retreat. It is only for educators. So the only people coming are going to be educators from South Carolina's public schools. It's June 12th through the 14th in Black Mountain, North Carolina. If you've not been there, it's just east of Asheville. It's a beautiful place called Quietude. It's a retreat center. And if you go to the website, you go to .us/retreat, you can read more about what the retreat is, and you can apply. There's an application button. You'll see a pink application that says apply to attend the retreat, and it will give you the pricing and everything. Basically, that includes 3 nights, 3 days, and 2 nights of accommodations, training. We're going to do yoga, and you'll be able to select a book to read that's relative to mindfulness. It's an amazing deal. You're not. I've never seen retreats priced like this. They're really designed to be really just to cover our cost. In fact, they don't really cover our costs. Most of the cost is covered by a grant from the Greater Public Schools grant, from the National Education Association. So we would love to have you on that retreat. You can find my email address on the website, and you can reach out to me if you have any questions about the retreat before you apply. Um, and and we hope to have many of these retreats. Um, I want to also say, if you are interested in joining the SCEA, you can see at the bottom of the screen. If you're not already a member, I highly encourage you to be a part of our movement. And you can do that at jointhescea.org, or you can text the word join to 48744. If you're not ready to join yet, but you'd like to learn more about the South Carolina Education Association, the only union for educators in the state of South Carolina, the only one bringing you this kind of content, the only one, like last night, standing up for our members in Charleston County by having a live streaming and letting folks talk about what happened at that school board meeting. We are advocating not just, when people think about mindfulness and self care, sometimes it can be really tone deaf. We're advocating for the inner and outer lives of educators. We're standing side by side with you to advocate for better wages, better working conditions, for the kind of policies that you and your students need to be successful, to be safe. But we also think that we need to provide you with resources like mindfulness, like self care, like yoga, to help you um, navigate the difficulties that you face as an educator, the stresses that are there. We need to have those resources. So we bring you information on nutrition and mindfulness and all kinds of wellness resources so that you can be well. We want you to be well inside and out. We want to help take care of you in every way that we can. So if you're interested in learning more about the SCEA, but you're not ready to join, you can go to the scea.org/YRO, fill that form out, and someone from our organization will be in touch with you. I also want to encourage you, if you want to know more about the events that we have going on, go to the scea.org/events. Then if you're not already registered to vote, please go to sevotes.gov and make sure that everybody in your building is registered to vote. We have to get out and vote in record numbers in the upcoming elections to make sure that we elect the right people to school boards and to represent us at the state house. We need pro public education people in positions of leadership in our state. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment in the comment section. And I'm about to put my email address up here too. So please feel free to email me at toddscholl@gmail.com if you have any questions or feedback about tonight's program or any of the programs that we do at Cool. We would love to hear your feedback and love to connect with you. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you have an awesome night. Tomorrow night, I'm going to be a part of the Defense of Democracy panel discussion that's taking place. That's going to happen at 6 o'clock. You can find out more of that about that on Facebook, and I look forward to that conversation. Have a wonderful night, and we'll see you on the next live stream. Take care.